Well, good evening, everybody. It's cold, it's dark, and personally, I haven't seen the sun for days. So I'm very grateful for all of you for making the effort to come and attend this evening's Exec Board of Wychavon District Council, Wednesday the 12th of February. Mel, have we got any apologies for absence?
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor R. Morris and the following non-members of the board, Councillors Dawkes, Dyke and Grady.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, any declarations of interest? Do anybody know? Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, I'm happy to propose those as a fair record.
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Giving you a bong as well. Right, leaders' announcements. Let me move on to those. So, I appreciate that many of you will probably have known David Noyes, and following the sad news of his passing away, I would like to formally acknowledge the significant contribution made by David to this council. David was a district councillor from 1979 to 2007, representing the Wychavon ward and then the Broadway and Wychavon ward. And David held a number of positions at the council, including executive board member, and in 2004 and 05, chairman of the council. David also played a significant role in the Evesham Market Town Partnership. As previously advised by Vic, David's funeral will take place at 11 a.m. On the 27th of February at Fladbury Crematorium, followed by a wake at St Egwin's Club, 117 The High Street, Evesham. So if you could please let Faith know if you plan on attending the wake. Thank you. As you'll probably be aware, I received a letter from the local government minister last week, formally inviting the submission of our unitary proposals. The interim plans should be provided to the government on or before the 21st of March 2025, and full proposals by the 28th of November 2025. As advised by our Chief Exec, Vic, we will be considering devolution and local government reorganisation at the council meeting on the 26th of February 2025, and given the deadline of the 21st of March for interim plans to be submitted, we will also be having a special council meeting on the 19th of March to look at those plans. In the meantime, I'm happy to discuss any aspect of this with any councillor at any time, more or less, and I know that Vic is happy to do the same, so thank you. We're holding an event for parish and town councils on the evening of the 6th of March. The programme for the evening covers a range of topics from dealing with parish council vacancies to proposed reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework and other changes to the planning system. There will be a choice of workshop sessions, and we will also be hearing from 3 parish councils about projects they've been involved with. Please encourage a couple of representatives from your parish or town councils to attend. I'd be very grateful if you could. And finally, just to confirm that we are currently working on our action plan in response to our corporate peer challenge feedback. And this will be discussed at the March Executive Board meeting and published on our website at the end of March. Okay, thank you. With that, Mel, have we had any questions from the public?
No, we have no questions.
All right, thank you very much. Well, in that case, we will move on to item number 6, report of the Budget Scrutiny Group, and I'll hand over to Councillor Aaron Powell. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Can I first of all express my thanks to the members of the Budget Scrutiny Group this year who met over many weeks to consider the draft budget proposals and have created the recommendations in the report that are before us this evening. This is the report of the Overview and Scrutiny Budget Scrutiny Group, and therefore the recommendations are the recommendations of that group to the Executive Board, rather than recommendations for the Executive Board necessarily to adopt. They're the recommendation to us. And so this report, in a sense, is for us to consider. But I'm pleased to say we have considered it, and the recommendations that are included in this report from the Budget Scrutiny Group are reflected in the main in the core budget report that we will come on to shortly. If I can pick them up initially one by one, and I'll do so starting from the bottom. So 2.6, so the sixth recommendation of the scrutiny group is that off-street car parking be considered as a particular area of scrutiny for next year's budget scrutiny group. And I'm pleased to say that we're happy for that to be the case, and officers will be working to ensure that information is available to allow that scrutiny to happen for next year. 2.5, the budget scrutiny group recommended that the council look to provide sufficient resources to highlight issues around fly tipping and to tackle problems associated with CCTV and fly tipping. And in response to that, I'm pleased to say that in the main budget report, we have built in an additional sum of £10,000 to support additional communications activity in relation to fly tipping and what residents can do about fly tipping. So we have taken that forward as well. In recommendation 2.4, the scrutiny group suggested that an earmarked reserve of £25,000 be created to support the additional provision or to give greater certainty of the provision of wildlife and woodlands location within the district. Having considered that carefully, we have in fact created within the budget report a provision of £30,000, so £5,000 more than the budget scrutiny group requested in order to achieve that aim. 2.3, the budget scrutiny group recommended considering the officers do work to look at a resident-focused flood relief scheme. That didn't request a specific amount of funding, but I can confirm that officers will be looking at what further action we can take to support flood relief schemes locally across the district. And at 2.2, the group recommended that we as an executive board consider allocating a budget of £50,000 to the housing team to look at a feasibility study and to consider what actions or what additional actions we as a district can take to increase the provision of affordable housing and temporary accommodation. It's important to remember that we work in partnership with a number of other agencies in the delivery of affordable housing, particularly our registered providers, and therefore it's particularly important that any actions that we take are appropriate in the context of the model that we have used for many years in Wychavon. But I am pleased to say that within the core budget report, we have included the £50,000 that has been requested for that feasibility study to be carried out. And that will be, whilst the terms of reference for that are still being worked through, that will be a broad-ranging study to look at exactly what we can do and to ensure that where perhaps there are houses that haven't been brought into a livable standard, that we can also work to make them available as affordable housing for residents in the district. So on all of the points that the budget scrutiny group requested changes to the budget, I'm very pleased to say that we have been able to respond and either to action those recommendations or indeed in two cases to allocate more money than the budget scrutiny group requested in order to be able to make that happen. In respect of recommendation 2.1, the budget scrutiny group suggested that we look to increase council tax by either 2.99% or 5%, or £5, at band D, whichever is the greater, recognising the long-term position of the council's finances over the course of the next 5 years. Members will recall that our original assumption going into the budget process was a 2% council tax increase for the coming year. We've considered this recommendation very carefully, and it is the case that over the course of the next 5 years, the council's finances are stretched, and we will see a reliance on some of our reserves in order to fund spending as currently forecast. There are a number of reasons for that. Perhaps the greatest is that we do not yet have certainty about what our funding will look like over the course of the next 5 years. We have made assumptions. In some cases, they're conservative assumptions, but we have made assumptions about the monies that we will receive that lead us to the position that we forecast. However, neither a 2% increase, a 2.99% increase, or a £5 increase will actually go a substantial way towards closing that gap across the course of the 5 years. £5 will obviously take us somewhere a little bit closer, but it doesn't really close the gap. The reality is that in order to close that gap, far more considered action is necessary. And therefore, in reviewing this, I have suggested that now is not the time for us to increase council tax by 2.99% or by £5. There are a number of reasons. Firstly, in the budget papers, as you will see, we are already forecasting a contribution to general funds, that is a surplus next year of 3.619 million. And it feels inappropriate to immediately increase the tax burden on our residents at a time when we are going to see a surplus next year into our general fund. Secondly, we are anticipating that over the course of the next few months, we will indeed finally see a multi-year settlement from government that we haven't had for many years previously. And that will give us some clarity as to actually what the scale of the challenge is and give us greater certainty as to what the challenge is. We've also, in light of that, and in response to the peer review that was undertaken, we have committed to looking to develop a transformation plan for the district, which will actually be the biggest single contributor to closing whatever gap there continues to be in terms of the finances over the course of the 5 years. And lastly, of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention the inevitable devolution and local government reorganisation is going to happen, which means that in reality, we don't know what our finances are going to look like over the next 5 years, even with a multi-year settlement, because the nature of the configuration of local government across the district will change. Therefore, I haven't decided to recommend to the Executive Board either a 2.99% increase or the £5 as the scrutiny group requested. However, we have increased the recommended council tax increase next year from 2%, which was the original assumption in November, to 2.5%, which is, in fact, the figure for inflation in January, which is the point at which we were finalising the budget. It seems to me that it is appropriate for us to seek to increase our council tax in line with inflation, that being a sort of a factual measure, as it were, and that will go some way towards helping to close the gap, albeit the significant change will come through the transformation plan that we will be developing over the coming months. That is how I have suggested that we respond to the recommendations of the scrutiny group, and with that I'm happy to refer the report to the Executive Board.
Thank you, Aaron. So Councillor Paul Middleborough, would you like to second that?
I'm more than happy to second it, and I think it's a very sensible way forward from the decisions and thoughts from the panel when they came forward. So I think, again, I'd like to thank them for coming forward with some good ideas.
Thank you, I thoroughly agree with that. So any comments or questions from anybody? Councillor Margaret Rowley, thank you.
Just a detail, I know you've mentioned here in the budget scrutiny about the fly tipping, but there's also an issue where the street sweeping has not been done according to the our contract. So, for instance, Tiverton hasn't been swept quarterly as it should be, at the most twice a year, and when contacting the contractors, they say that twice a year is correct. So are we correctly spending our current resources? Can we afford not to increase them? Because we're not providing the services as required.
Okay, thank you. I can't speak, obviously, on the details of Tiverton, but what I would suggest is if you wouldn't mind taking it up with Ian and his team to just sort of check what the schedule should be. I mean, I think we should clarify that first.
Schedule as it should be from one of the recent overview and scrutiny meetings, and I think Ian assured me that that's what should be happening, but it does not seem to be.
All right,
so
I'll ask.
Take it up with him.
I think Ian's willing to give a comment. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not a failure of funding; it's a failure of the contractor. We've actually brought a subcontractor in to help with some of the work that hasn't been done, but we'll take that offline, Margaret, if that's okay.
Thank you.
I think what I would say is, you know, we set a standard. And that's what we want to adhere to. I appreciate it. It's very disappointing if the contractor hasn't failed to meet their targets, but I think the key thing is, yeah. Yes, But having said that, contractors are not all perfect, and I think we just have to say that where they're not, we are willing to step in and make sure that we do get the right result for our residents, and I think that's the key message to give back. Thank you. Councillor Dan Boatright Green. Sorry. Yeah, right.
Thank you. Really, it's a bit of a difficult one because obviously we don't know when and for how long we're going to exist, which makes this a bit of an existential crisis more than a kind of financial existential crisis is probably a new one. But obviously the degree to which we have to plan for 5 years has now shifted. Obviously we don't know when we have to stop planning over a 5-year plan. But what is our actual plan to handle this as we go forward? Obviously knowing that a 5-year plan is the standard, but obviously at some point we will then move to a 4, 3, etc., etc. I'm assuming we do have some sort of, I almost want to say like a playbook that you're expected to follow, bearing in mind other councils have done this, but obviously, we've still got to look to the future and making sure we're stable throughout our existence. And how do we, as councillors, make sure that we understand that? Because I know that's a challenge to ask, but obviously it must have gone through your head in the same way it's gone through mine.
Yes, indeed. So, as you say, other councils have gone through this process in the past, and there are standard processes that they will have followed in order to make that happen. Of course, what is different about what's happening currently in terms of local government reorganisation is the scale of it, in terms of the number of authorities that are affected, and the pace of it, in that it is expected to happen considerably faster than it has perhaps elsewhere. And therefore, I suspect there will be elements of those previously followed patterns that will be relevant, and there will be others that will not be relevant. As the government finalises the proposals around local government reorganisation, I suspect we will be given a set of rules to follow. And when we have those rules, we will seek to understand them as best we can and to communicate them as best we can to everyone involved. But inevitably, these are going to be complex arrangements involving a number of authorities, many of whom are going to be in different financial positions to the one that we are in. And we will have to navigate those rules very carefully to protect the residents of Wychavon over the coming years.
Okay, so let me just, Councillor Julie Tucker, and then Councillor Dan Birch, and then Councillor Gregory Wilkins.
Thank you. I hope I speak on behalf of the rest of the budget scrutiny group in saying that we're very pleased at the things that you've taken on board and increased in 2 cases, as you say. And I think also we can understand the situation on the council tax simply because you have now had more information than we had when we were doing the scrutiny. So thank you very much as far as we're concerned, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, much appreciated. And we do appreciate, as I think Aaron has said, the work that's done by that committee. It's a lot of work over a pretty, I was going to say a sociable time normally, so it's doubly difficult, I think, for them to do it. Thank you, it's very good. Okay.
Thank you, Leader. I think for most of us, when the devolution announcement came out, it threw a little bit of a spanner in the works, especially as it came, as the budget was being decided and being finalised. But I think the message that we need to be sending out, the message that we are sending out is it's business as usual at the moment. We've got no idea what's happening. We've got no idea what sort of format we're going to take. So internally and externally, it's business as usual, and we carry on as if we would, and as if we were, 6 to 12 months ago. And I'd like to thank Aaron for his recommendation as far as the council tax is concerned, because I think we're very much doing the right thing. We couldn't afford to continue freezing council tax in the same way that we'd fortunately been able to, because unfortunately everything is rising in cost, and we've got to reflect the national economic picture. But the thing that we can't then go and do is raise it by the maximum amount year on year, because although us here at Wychavon may be feeling the pinch, there are thousands of people living out within the district who are feeling the pinch far more than we are. And we've got to make sure that we take them into consideration when we're deciding on these council tax rates, and ensuring that we're maintaining our affordability. We're currently the 5th lowest council tax authority by the most recent surveys, and we want to keep within that percentile. So I think the rise is reasonable, but we don't want to be going much further than this realistically year on year. We don't want to be increasing by the maximum amount every year going forward, because it's simply not fair on our residents. And while we are feeling the pinch, it's far harder for them out there with the current economy. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Gregory?
Yeah, I wanted to just quickly ask a question about something that was said earlier. If a contractor is contracted to provide a service and they do not fulfill that service to the level that we have agreed upon, is there some kind of recourse, punitive measure we take to either recoup money for the services not delivered or find a contractor that can actually fulfill the obligations as agreed upon?
Every contract will have its own terms related to delivery and what the measures are that can be taken in the event of non-delivery. So yes, there will be mechanisms within the contract, but they'll all be different depending on which individual contract. I'm sure Ian could add more, but I would hesitate to say it would be easy to simply remove the contract and seek to identify an alternative supplier who can deliver it for a number of reasons. One, many of these contracts take many months, if not years, sometimes to negotiate and agree and to go through the procurement processes. So it's not a simple question of taking it away from them. And secondly, in many cases, there are a limited number of suppliers who are actually able to carry out the work that we need. But we are able to, and we will follow up with each individual contractor in cases of non-performance.
Just to say, you've probably seen that we haven't spent that money that was used for that job was not spent. So if you look back in budgets, you'll see that it's underspent on that.
So we're within budget, but we are spending a bit more, is that?
We didn't spend that money because we didn't get that sweep in the roast wasn't done, so we didn't spend the money.
Okay, fine, yeah. Councillor Charles Tucker, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to say that I'm very pleased and grateful to the board for the movement, substantial movement in terms of wildlife and woodlands. I think very clearly, if we are to make a real difference to the depletion of wildlife and nature within our district, it does need us to step up to the plate and put some money where our mouth is. And so this £30,000 is even more than was asked for, so I'm very pleased to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Emma Sims, thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo our chair for the budget scrutiny group. It was a really interesting process, and I'd actually like to thank Jane Pickering and her staff for the amount of work that they undertook. I think at one point the officers, had to answer 64 questions that the panel put before them in analysing the budget review. And I think our premise was in sort of ensuring that there was its effectiveness, accountability and alignment with our key priorities as a council, people, place and environment. We looked at each one of those subjects individually and analysed those for the review. So thank you very much to all. I'm sorry to be second.
No, thank you. I mean, I'm delighted to hear that a lot of questions were raised. You've got some way to go until you compete with the inspectors currently looking at the SWDPR. I think they're well into the 300 range, as I understand it. But you've done very well with your questioning, and I think it sounds a bit more proportionate, probably. Good. Any more questions from anybody? No? All right. In that case, we'll move on to the item 7, the We Are Wychavon plan, which I'm going to just have a look at. So that's page 55. So what we're doing here, we are actually making an amendment to this to add on a little bit more money to be spent, I think, on empty homes, or add a new target for that. And what I was going to suggest is if we could perhaps combine this with item 14, which is the We Are Wychavon Q3 performance report, which was sent out as a separate note, because I think the two things sort of do go together. I mean, my view is that we now have a much more user-friendly and easy report to read. I've asked, and I think it's been carried out, for everybody to have a hard copy, at least of this one, so that we don't lose sight of it. I appreciate sometimes looking at it on the iPad can be a bit tedious. A lot of money, just in defending my decision to have it printed briefly, a lot of money is spent on actually producing all the numbers. Obviously, probably we've spent many thousands of officers' time and others in getting that far. So I think actually getting it printed occasionally is not a bad investment of our efforts. So I think with that, I'm going to ask if there's any comments from exec board members on things that they particularly wanted to highlight in their areas from the report. I'm hoping that most people will have had a chance to look through it, and if you've got any questions, now is the time to bring those forward. I was delighted to see the level of performance that we've had over this time, and the fact that we are progressing well in almost all of our main promises, at least those that we're measuring at the moment, are doing pretty well. So with that, Rick, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. First, I would like to pick up on the amendment over the empty homes promise. This is something we've really pushed a lot over the last year or so. If members haven't had a chance to meet our empty homes officer, please do. She's very passionate about what she does. If you've got empty homes in your area, please highlight it to her. So we set this promise about a year ago. In the first year, our officer has set a clear picture of the empty homes. We've developed a database, and in the first year, she's carried out 70 visits, and is just about to deliver our empty home strategy. Within this year, she's also managed to intervene and bring back 7 properties back to use without the use of enforcement. And our promise around this is to bring 30 more properties back to life by 2028, which I think is an incredible effort, and I think our officers are doing a really good job, especially with the time it takes to do NBOs and stuff like that. If we're doing this without enforcement, I think it's really, really key. If you indulge me further, I'd like to praise our housing team even further, Chris. No, I think it's important when we look at the numbers on our report. I think we need to remember they often refer to people, and I think that's often missed. And I think while the corporate promises are important, and they do achieve a lot, and we have some fantastic ones, I think the business as usual ones are very key. So I've got a couple of things I'd like to highlight of where our officers have gone above and beyond, because I think it's important that we do hear these things. So one of our housing officers and our outreach team have been working closely with a homeless person whom had been placed in emergency accommodation following a homeless approach. The lady had significant physical and mental health needs and was struggling to live independently. The team worked with her to provide intense support in the accommodation over a number of months, and worked with her on the skills needed to live independently. Again, it's something we don't often think about. We enabled an offer of permanent accommodation within a rooftop property, and the lady was nervous about living independently, having not access to online services, so for food shopping and to application for benefits, etc. To the point where she felt she couldn't move out of the temporary accommodation. So the team arranged for a second-hand laptop to be purchased. I'm informed the IT team actually checked it to make sure it was working, and then went to visit her to set it all up. This small act gave the lady confidence to live independently. A further case, there was a rough sleeper case, and one of our outreach team had been working with the rough sleeper with substance misuse for some time, and building up that relationship again, which takes a lot of time, and the trust she managed to get to the point where they talked to him about no first night out accommodation, which is our temporary accommodation, emergency bed space in partnership with Rooftop and the charity CCP. We paid for this from the rough sleeper funding. We helped him to make the right choice to access support and accommodation and come away from the streets. He agreed to access substance misuse support, and after a short time at the emergency accommodation, we then helped him get an offer of permanent accommodation. Ironically, this person was first alerted to us by referral from our council parts team, so that shows some really good joined up working there. And finally, there was a domestic abuse case. The outreach team had been working with someone experienced domestic abuse for some time and supporting them to leave the unsafe environment. There had been a pattern of trying to leave but not feeling able. One day, this person bravely decided to access safe house accommodation in the district, but no money for fuel in their car for safe accommodation. Despite it being in the end of the day, the outreach team went above and beyond by immediately driving out to meet the person, met them at the petrol station, put fuel in their car so they could drive to the accommodation. It's a really key to act quickly when someone makes the decision to access support and safe accommodation. And to be flexible so we can enable the right support at the right time. What I wanted to do by highlighting those cases was to show that while we look at the level of the service level we have, there are so much more that comes to it, and there's so much complexity to all those cases. And I would like to put it on record my thanks to all the teams for how much our officers do go above and beyond. And it's often not highlighted enough, so I would like to thank them for that.
Well, thank you very much for that, Rick. I mean, and having sort of been the portfolio holder for housing prior to you, and having known what that team does very well, I think it's absolutely right that we should highlight it occasionally, because I think one of the things that strikes me is that prevention is really the key thing that we are doing here, and the cost of cure, if somebody falls into a difficult place, is much, much higher. So, in fact, by going above and beyond, we actually save everybody money nationally. We save a lot of pain and heartache as well in the process. But it is a very tough job, I think, being in the housing team. Hats off to all the people who are in there, because I think going home after a week of dealing with those difficulties, it must take it out of you. But I think they do a fabulous job, and I know that many of them wouldn't want to do any other job either, which is even more good to hear. Okay, any others? Dan, do you want to?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I think we're going to have an embargo on the word devolution soon, but I'll say it one more time. So it's worth noting that Wychavon are one of the few district councils to have a dedicated health and wellbeing officer, purely because it's not a district council function according to statute. It's a county function. But we're very, very lucky to have somebody at Wychavon, and Hayley Corbett's been doing an exceptional job over the past couple of months in leading on one of our key promises, which is about delivering health and wellbeing training to local businesses. Now, Hayley has an incredible amount of knowledge, having worked at County Council before she worked here. But despite this, we've been focusing on speaking to the businesses themselves and understanding what it is that they need before we go out and enroll out any scheme. So what she's done is she's been out there in the community, meeting with these businesses and understanding what sort of support that they need to deliver health and wellbeing training, so that they are better equipped and more able to support customers who are coming into their hairdressers or coming into their coffee shop and experiencing mental health difficulties. So we've had those focus groups now. They went incredibly well, and Hayley and Bramwyn did an incredible job with those. So hopefully in the next few months we shall start to see some of the results coming from those, and we'll start to see more and more businesses across the district getting this key training and being able to support their customers better in terms of providing and signposting them to mental health support. So we're doing an incredible job there. And then the other one, which once again linking back to the county council, is I'm sure all of us in this room are aware of the struggles within the SEND provision for the county, and it's an incredibly stretched service. And once again, it's not a district council function. But at Wychavon, because of the fact that we're such an apt authority, we don't let that stop us. So we are intervening, and we are doing what we can to support SEND provision and to support the county council while we're able. And one of the things that we've been working on, and David Manning's done an incredible job with this, along with Jen and once again with Hayley and Leonie, is working with the schools and working with parents, most importantly, because they're the ones that know best, in producing a document that we can give out to schools, which will detail what the schools can do to help children with additional needs, and to ensure that they're accessing the same learning opportunities as everybody else in that school. So by producing this document, we're supporting the schools, but all the information in it is coming from parents, because they're the ones that know what their children need, and they're the ones that are able to tell us best how we can help. So I'm incredibly proud of those two promises in particular. But ultimately, you'll see that this report is predominantly in the green, which it should be at this stage. But we're doing a very good job. And I think, as Rick has said, our officers are doing an exceptional job. And it's because of them that we're able to keep on track and we're able to deliver all of these key promises. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Dan. And I think I would add, having looked through the report myself, that I was particularly pleased to see that we've now gone live with our anti-vaping campaign, which was something that came out of the local democracy day, not this year but the year before. That we now have a youth club in Broadway, which we're supporting, and youth clubs are, of course, incredibly important. There's been a lot of talk about that in the news recently for fairly obvious and very tragic reasons. Under our place initiatives, I'm pleased to see the progress that we're making with Willow Court, which will be a stunning example of social housing being in a listed building. I think that's probably going to be, well, if not a first across this country, I don't think there'll be very many others, and that we're going ahead with planning permission for the Laurels. And I was also delighted to see something that I know Councillor Dan Boatwright-Green and I discussed a long time ago, that the fact that we've got some mentoring going on and that's being supported by the council officers here, which is a great thing through the Power Up initiative. And finally, in the environmental area, the Litter Lotto campaign and idea seems to be going very well indeed, and obviously is an important initiative in trying to ensure that people don't put the wrong stuff in the wrong bin, which of course is, I think, very easy to do. So with that, and before we take a vote on the actual change, are there any questions from anybody in amongst our councillors? Councillor Boatwright-Green.
Just on the mentoring thing, just a massive thank you on this one, because I do distinctly remember it was during COVID, because I remember trying to get my tablet to work on Teams for the first time, and it was deciding it didn't want to do it. I can honestly say I think I needed mentoring at that point. But it is something that has actually it's come about from a long series of conversations about trying to make sure that we do increase access to people for especially rural young people where they don't necessarily know about kind of job roles, and a number of conversations I have with people about the kind of jobs that are actually in this council, and I do find it quite confusing actually that actually before I joined the council I didn't know what half these roles were, and I've got to be just because literally she's in my eye line, I had no idea that, you know, Misha's job even existed as a thing, let alone kind of what it actually then involved and what it entailed. Yet it's now one of those jobs where actually I can imagine quite a few young people I've met over the past 5 years where actually I do sort of want to push them towards that. I think they'd be very good at it. It's something that they probably would never have thought about in the kind of a legal sphere, because of course whenever they see kind of legal activity on TV it looks nothing like what Misha does. So it's something that I know they'd enjoy it, I promise. But it is just something that actually I think if we can keep that kind of activity going, actually does also make us more open to our communities as well. Because I do sometimes think people see kind of a council in this chamber and it does sound like something that's a bit kind of distant from them. But actually a lot of our staff would want to do that. I think all of our staff actually would want to do that. So it's just a massive thank you, and I hope that continues.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. Any other comments? No. In that case, we'll vote on the changes that were recommended on this item. All those in favour?
That's unanimous.
Thank you. Right, in that case, we're on to item 8, and it's Aaron to talk about the budget and the money plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Well, after that description of all the great things that we're doing, this is going to sound rather dry and dull, I'm afraid, because it's the money. But the reality is, without the money, we can't do any of those things. So hopefully you'll see the purpose after all and understand that it is rather important. I should say, first of all, my thanks to Jane and to Alice and the team for the hard work in pulling this together again. It's a tremendous amount of work that has to be done in a relatively short space of time. As you will know, we set the initial parameters in September. We then set the initial draft budget in November. We then get the settlement from government, or the provisional settlement from government, in sort of mid-December, about a week before Christmas. And Alice and the team have to work through what that means and what all the implications are of that in terms of the numbers that we have. And then we get the final settlement around about now, where all those numbers are actually confirmed. So it's an awful lot of work over a relatively short space of time, and the team do work very hard in pulling this all together. This is the formal budget proposal. It is a series of recommendations for us to agree as an executive board to take to council in 2 weeks' time. And of course, it is the council that will then formally agree the budget. It reflects the changes, or it reflects the monies that we have had confirmation of through the provisional finance settlement from the government, and those changes are all spelt out in the report in section 3.3. I think it's fair to say we've won some and lost some along the way, broadly, but we were largely, or the team were very accurate in terms of what they anticipated the outcome would be in terms of what we actually have received. I've addressed already the recommendations from the Budget Scrutiny Group, which are also reflected in the final report. And what we are now proposing is a net revenue expenditure next year of 13.584 million, which is actually up from, I think it's 11.747 million pound outturn we anticipate this year. So that's our expected total revenue spend next year, and the changes that have gone into that, including some of the additional grant funding that we have received, or continued grant funding from things like the Shared Prosperity Fund, are reflected in section 3.10. I would draw attention to one element of additional cost, and that is in respect of employers' national insurance. You'll be aware that the government increased employers' national insurance and not employees' national insurance in the budget in November. As a result of that, the government did agree to compensate local authorities for that. However, the amount of compensation that we receive does not actually cover the full cost of the employer's national insurance increase. So there is an additional cost to us. And I understand from another meeting I was at today that that compensation may only be for 1 year. So we may have a further burden in the future in respect of the increase in employers' national insurance. So we are affected, I'm afraid, by decisions at a national level around taxation, as many other businesses will be, albeit they are affected to a rather greater extent. So there are a number of recommendations. The first is to set the revenue budgets as outlined, including that 2.5% council tax increase at a band, 2.5% council tax increase at Band D, as I referred to earlier. There are the detailed proposals for fees and charges in Appendix B. There's the capital programme and money plan, which takes us through to 2029-2030 at Appendix C, albeit the comments that we made earlier around local government reorganisation and the impact of that, as well as the money plan, the revenue money plan for that period of time. I will echo again my thanks to the Budget Scrutiny Group for their work in making their recommendations and commend the recommendations to the Executive Board.
Thank you very much, Aaron, and I would want to thank you for the work that you've done in working through the due diligence of the budget with the officers and with everybody else. I think we've struck the right sort of balance. I mean, one of the considerations that I felt was on my mind was the fact that in reducing or cutting council tax, we are obviously ultimately over time reducing our own ability to change and deliver for our residents. And you have to consider whether or not that investment is a sensible payback. To my mind, and having heard the examples that were given earlier by both Rick and Dan, those investments have a very big payback, and those paybacks come to all of us as residents. And I suspect overall, as a community, we're better off by having a little bit more money being spent by the council on those things. So I have no hesitation in supporting the rise that we've got, which is in line with inflation. And happy to second this. Any comments then from the floor? Paul, beg your pardon. See you there.
I always press the wrong button. I think given all the changes that we've been faced with since we started the budget process, altogether we've got a very good budget coming forward. We've got big changes in terms of the world economy coming forward. We've got changes from the government coming forward on a pretty regular basis that have to be picked up. But I just want to say one thing about Appendix E, the risk analysis. And I know we all don't want to talk about reorganisation in that sense. But I think Appendix E is a very good document as we go forward to actually keep going back to, because it talks about the risks that are there for the coming years. And if I just pick at one of them off, you say we're and the county council is in itself concerned about its financial position. One aspect of that for us is the question of superannuation payments and contributions as we roll forward with reorganisation. And I think it's quite nice to see in the context of the county council that the superannuation fund is in good fettle. And I think that is a slight reassurance for the risks that we have financially in the future. But I think it's an excellent budget in the circumstances.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Charles Tucker.
Just one point. In 3.15, it refers to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, now being confirmed at 1.067 million. I understood that this was going to be 1.3 million. Is that actually a reduction, or is there another element within the budget which makes it up to the 1.3?
I'll ask Ian to comment. Thank you.
I think that refers to the revenue element of UK SPF. The balance is capital.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
So I think the figure in the report you're referring to, Charles, refers to the revenue element of UK SPF. The 1.3 total included an additional element of capital, which won't be referenced in this report.
Perhaps I could have a chat to you about it afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other points? No? Good. All right. In that case, we'll vote on this one. Thank you. All those in favour?
That's unanimous.
All right. Well, now we are moving on to the capital strategy. So I'll ask Councillor Aaron Powell to introduce that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. So the capital strategy is something that we are required to produce each year as a matter of good practice. It is required by SIPFA as much as anybody else, the Chartered Institute for Public Finance Accountants, to set out the context in which we will seek to make capital investments and, if necessary, to borrow funds. We are in the fortunate position, as members will know, that we do have significant reserves and therefore do not have a requirement to borrow externally. However, it is important that we spell out the criteria that we would use should that be necessary as an authority. But this report is largely unchanged from previous years in spelling out how we will look to manage our investments and our capital. Perhaps the most significant change is that we have included this year 4 key commitments as to areas of spending that we would seek, areas where we would seek to support investment. And so we've spelt out at the end of the paragraph or section 2, I suppose, 4 key areas where we believe council support may be required to deliver further investment, namely the Lido in Droitwich, the Riverside Centre in Evesham, the Raven in Droitwich, and the Worcestershire Parkway development. We thought it was important to reference those as key priorities for capital investment, not only by the council, but by others across the district. And so I commend the capital strategy to you.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Middleborough.
Thank you, Leader. I'm more than happy to second the report as it is. I know it's a bit into the details of of prudent financial management, which is what it's about, and it's about looking after our existing assets and being sensible and also bold in terms of those 4 developments which Aaron has just mentioned, and I think that's important given our resources. And again, I think that shows the direction of travel that we're taking. We're not going into stagnation when that dark cloud of reorganisation floats over us, which many authorities do go into stagnation at that stage, and they forget what they're about We know what we're about for the people of Wychavon, and this really spells it out.
Thank you very much. Any comments from anybody on that one? Questions? No? All right, in that case, we'll vote on item 9. All those in favour?
That's unanimous.
Thank you, Misha. Right, then item 10, Treasury Management Strategy. The same team again, I think. So, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Leader. Me again, I'm afraid, in the same vein. So this is the strategy that, again, we look at annually to indicate how we will manage our investments and the measures we will use, or the indicators we will use to measure our performance, or the performance of our investments over the course of the year. So the strategy has been updated to include our current estimate of longer-term interest rates and to spell out the prudential indicators that we are going to use over the course of the coming year. There are no changes in substance to the majority of the strategy, with the exception of the addition of one further building society that we may choose to invest monies with on the basis of anticipated returns. With that, I move the recommendation that we recommend this strategy to Council.
Thank you. Paul, if you would
I second the recommendations.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone? No? Pretty straightforward. All right, thank you very much. All those in favour?
That's unanimous.
Right, in that case, we'll move on to item 11, which is something just for us to note, page 151, the Building Enhancements Budget Update. That's you again, Councillor Aaron Powell.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, so this is an update in respect of our building enhancements budget and the monies that have been spent and are due to be spent from that budget over the course of the coming 12 months. I think in summary, some things have been delivered, other things require reprofiling, and some items have been removed. However, I would say that the items that have been removed are because they're captured in other projects. So you'll see at 3.2 that 4 of the original 15 projects will be delivered as part of our capital investments in the Droitwich Lido and the Droitwich Leisure Centre improvements, and therefore do not require funding from this budget and will be funded from our broader capital budget. 6 of the original 15 projects have been delivered, and there are a number of additional projects that are identified within the report as requiring delivery. Overall, I think, as you can see, we've spent £186,000 from the building enhancement budget, I should say, and there is a total of around £540,000 remaining for us to spend on the items that are indicated in this report.
Thank you. Councillor Dan Birch.
Yeah, happy to commend the report. I think it's clear where the spend is going, and I think it's reasonable analysis.
Thank you, and I'd just like to say I'm very pleased that we have got this report. The whole thing feels, a lot more tightly screwed down. I think we've got a good understanding of where our risks and liabilities are on our buildings, and I just wanted to thank our officers for getting us to that place. Okay, it's just something that we need to note. Any questions on it? Good. All right, in that case, we will move on to the next item, item 12, and that's going to be the Capital Parks budget. Councillor Beverley Hartman, please.
I hope you all agree that the parks and open spaces do a fantastic job, as we've seen from the report from public, 91% satisfaction. The parks are asking for this money because they want to do works, and anything over £50,000, they will be papered to the exec board. However, the Capital Projects Board will also look into other spends they do, so don't worry about that. It's going to be used on things like footpaths in Abbey Park or Workman Gardens in Evesham, and also there's a whole lot of biodiversity will also be included. It's not just parks, there will be also some open spaces that will be worked on. I hope you approve this.
Thank you very much, Beverley. That's super. Right, Councillor Rob Adams, please, to second.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Very happy to second this. This is just nothing but common sense to have this in place. So when the opportunity arises, you can get in and do these projects without going back to the executive board, which all eats up time. There's several examples, as Beverly had said, at 3.4 in the agenda, Tagwell Open Space Workman Gardens at Abbey Park. That's just some idea of what we are looking to do, those sort of things. It's common sense, and therefore I move the recommendation, or second the recommendation, at 2, 2.1, little 1, 2 and 3. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Rob. Any questions from anyone on this? Councillor Dan Boatwright Green.
Just want to say again a very big thank you about the boardwalk, because we were talking a while ago about trying to make it more accessible for people, and by widening it means that those who are less able can actually make use of it as well. Also means we can get past each other, and I know this was mentioned quite a few years ago about something, whether we could do something about this, so it is really great to see that we're now at a point where we've seen money assigned to it. So thank you very much for listening to the residents and us when we were talking about it.
Can I quickly add, I think thanks also to all the work the parks have done in the last year. It has shown in a survey, and I'd like to put that forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your thanks, Dan, and thank you, Beverly, for your point about the parks. I mean, absolutely, we should be very proud of the record that we've got across a number of services. And I was going to say it at some point, but I'm going to say it now. I think as we go through the devolution journey, a key thing I think for us to have at the front of our minds, especially when we meet next, is to look at each of the services that we currently do and ask ourselves, in whatever format the Unitary Authority takes, how is that service going to run at least as well as it does now in Wychavon, and if not, ideally, even better? And I think the answer will be different for each service. You know, we've got to look at each one. There's no one-size-fits-all about any of this. I think we've heard about the work of the housing team. You know, that needs one-to-one care of people who are often in an awful state. I don't think there's an easy way of scaling that up. And I think that's the thing that we've got to discuss with all of those, all the other districts and the county council, as we work hard to figuring out what the best format for the unitary is in the future. I hope that when we get together, and I'm sure we will in this council, have a sensible discussion about what that means in practice, you know, and the practicalities of it. This is a moment for being practical. It's not really a moment, I think, necessarily for being too emotional about it, as much as we all, I think, feel a great sense of loss at this council at some point coming to a close. The good news is we might actually exist for a little bit longer than we thought before the elections were likely to be cancelled. So it's quite likely that this council will carry on going now until 2028, which fits in well with our target plans and so on. And so that's something that we should also bear in mind. And I think that the points that were made earlier about, you know, we've got to stick to the knitting and keep on delivering as a council during all of that time are key. But we should also be optimistic, I think, about the fact that the culture that we've got, the innovation that we've got, and the staff that we've got, I hope will play a really key role in whatever comes next. And I will certainly be fighting very hard to make sure that they do. So I look forward to the discussion that we'll have in a couple of weeks' time. I'm sure it will be a very helpful meeting, and we will have, of course, a further meeting about it later on as we get to the proposal, or the interim proposal, going forward in March. Right. With that, have we voted on the capital projects part budget? We have not. It's time that we did, therefore. All those in favour?
Unanimous.
Thank you very much. Right. Lastly, item 13, references from committees. Councillor Rob Adams.
Yes, just one this evening, Leader. Section 106, put in by Wychavon Leisure Community Association Limited to fund the installation of 12 sets of smart bars and weights at Pershaw Leisure Centre. And this is a recommendation that came on for the Communities and Funding Panel. And there I move it A and B, that up to 9,364 and 45 pence is allocated from the Section 106 contribution reserves to enable the Wychavon Leisure Centre to install 12 sets of smart bars and weights at Pershore Leisure Centre, King George's Way, Pershore, and then at, well, it says A again, but actually it'd be B, I suppose, to delegate to the head of legal services authority to release the monies to Wychavon Leisure as required on receipt of satisfactory invoices. I do say now, I'll leave it to younger men like to my right to go and test these things. No doubt there you are for the fitness there. A recommendation, I'm sure it'll be used. I'm not sure it'll ever be weared out, these things, but you go and try them out anyway, Dan. I move that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Rob. And I'm going to ask the young man next to you now to second this item. I think it's appropriate that he does. He can't, apparently, because he's a trustee of the Leisure Centre. In that case, that's a bit disappointing. I will second it happily, and I'll speak to Dan later just to find out exactly what the smart bars are and what they do, or what I should do with one. Fine. Any comments or questions on it, Councillor Boatwright-Green?
I'm not accepting this ageism, and I would like to just point out I'm expecting a full executive photo opportunity once they're installed. Rob, you'll be at the front. I can imagine the whole thing, and I expect to be invited for the show, because I'm sorry, that was just the worst example of I couldn't possibly do it. You leave it to younger people. Come on now, get in there, get your weights going. It's good for you.
I think he's right as well. I'm pretty sure that is the best advice. We're supposed to carry on weightlifting well into our 80s. Good. and just to be clear, there's nobody on the exec board who's that old. And having clarified that important point, we're not entirely sure. We are now going to vote on this item. All those in favour?
That's carried.
All right. Well, with that, thank you all very much for your participation and for all your hard work. See you soon. Thank you.